Chapter 20. Hatter Madigan left Paris within 32 hours of escaping the Palace of Justice and scoured the country in search of Alice. After weeks of fruitless searching, he arrived in the Principality of Monaco on the Mediterranean coast. It was mid-August, the peak of summer. He hadn't yet visited a single hat shop when he was walking down a side street near the beach and heard a passing gentleman exclaim to a companion, "Ah, regarde cela! Pauvre petit chapeau de forme!" Hatter had picked up enough French to know that chapeau meant hat. As the men continued on their way, he turned for a glimpse of the headwear in question and saw a top hat floating in the middle of a puddle. He knew in a moment it was his hat. How had it gotten there? Hatter examined the puddle. It should have been evaporating in the heat, but he could tell by its edges that it wasn't. An evaporating puddle would have had a ring of damp around it, indicating its original size before the effects of the sun. Hatter had studied his share of puddles during his time in this world, wondering which of them, if any, might take him back to Wonderland once he was reunited with Princess Alice. There had been nothing telltale about any of them, nothing signifying their use as a return portal. But this one, careful not to step in it, he bent down and picked up the hat. It was soaked, but it looked all right. He flicked his wrist, and there they were, the S-shaped blades. So the weapon still worked. With another wrist flick, the blades morphed back into a dripping top hat, which Hatter put on his head, tapping the crown as might a dandy, adding the final touch to his wardrobe before heading out for a night of frolic and fun. As a test, Hatter picked up a stone and dropped it into the puddle. Kerwhoosh! The water sucked it down and out of sight. Could this be a return portal? Might the Pool of Tears, the only means out of Wonderland, have many return portals, various portal routes connecting to it like tentacles to the head of an octopus? And what if Alice had discovered one of them, a puddle situated where no water should naturally have been, and traveled back to Wonderland? It was unlikely, since no one who'd entered the Pool of Tears had ever yet returned. But Alice was not your average Pool of Tears traveler. She wasn't average in anything. If she had returned, she would not survive long. She didn't have the training, her imaginative muscle unexercised, and red wouldn't stand for it. Hatter flattened his top hat into blades, aligning them in a stack to make them as compact as possible. He tucked the weapon into a secure, thick-lined pocket inside his coat. He had no intention of losing it again. But what if his theory was wrong? What if this puddle led to some unknown destination instead of back to Wonderland? Stepping into it was a serious risk for Alice's sake and for that of the queendom. It was one he had to take. Okay, so at the end of this chapter, I promised my own students that I would go over my assignment that I do with their reading, which is depth of knowledge questions, aka DOKs. DOKs are used in all subjects, but I like to use them with this book because it allows students to focus on the plots that they are drawn to naturally. So there are 3 levels of DOK questions, and it goes up to 3. The questions increase in difficulty to answer. DOK 1s are questions whose answers can be easily pointed out in the text. So some examples of DOK 1s for Chapter 20 would be, where is Hatter Madigan? He is in Paris, and that's in the first paragraph on page 145. Another one would be, what does Hatter find in a puddle? The answer to that question would be his long-lost hat. The next DOK 1 question I would use is, what does Hatter use to test whether the puddle is connected to the Pool of Tears and can be used as a portal? And he uses a pebble or a rock stone, it says, on the first full paragraph on page 146, about the middle of the page. Another one would be, what happened to the stone that he dropped? And that would be that it got sucked through and disappeared. Another one would be, what could Hatter's hat do? It could turn into multiple weapons. So all of those would be acceptable DOK ones. Those are questions that good readers naturally use in their head to track whether or not they're understanding their reading. To my students, you have to write these down, yes, but your brain should naturally be forming these questions. And if it's not, the point is teach your brain how to naturally form these questions as you read to make sure you understand. Okay, so DOK2s are questions that are a little bit harder to answer. They require inference. So vocabulary questions are good. For instance, the word principality in the first pair for a question. I could say, based on how it's used, what can we guess the word principality means? And you can guess that it's like a section of state or country or something, because it says he arrived in the Principality of Monaco on the Mediterranean coast. So we know we're talking geography because we've got mention of Monaco and Mediterranean coast. So we know a principality is going to be somewhere A, he could arrive in, and B, in those areas of the world. So we can guess that principality means section of land or a geographic location. The other thing we could ask is, how had it gotten there? He asks this to himself. So any question a character asks him or herself is totally acceptable for a DOK2, because you have to think about that answer because that character is thinking about that answer. And because they're thinking about that answer, they obviously don't know the answer to that question. And that means that you certainly don't either, but you can figure it out through inference. So he asks himself, how had it gotten there? It referring to his hat. So our answer to that question would naturally be that it, just like he and Alice got separated after they jumped into the pool of tears, the hat got separated from them as well. But a DOK3 question that strictly aligns to this chapter would be, what role does duty play in a person's decision to act? Hatter feels that he has to fulfill a duty and rescue Alice. He's in this other world, so it doesn't matter, if he fulfills this duty or not. It's strictly, he's abiding by his own moral code. So my answer to this question would be, duty affects a person's moral code because all of our actions are not known and we can keep secrets, but duty causes us to act as we said we would, and it's part of who we are. So my answer would be that there are some people who commit to duty and some people who don't. And Hatter is one of the former. And when I say the former, that means the first mentioned. So I first mentioned that Hatter felt compelled to do this, whether or not he was being watched. He did the right thing. I hope that helped. I'm sorry for those of you who aren't my students, but hopefully you learned something there. I hope you enjoyed that review. And on to chapter 21.